Welcome back to the Seeing Red podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Fulce. Thank you so much for joining us yet again. Make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast on your listening platform, or if you're on YouTube, make sure you put on alerts as well. And if you want to comment or email us at host@seeingredpodcast.com, feel free to reach out. We love to hear from you. We got a great episode for you today. We have Brandon Hall. He's the Republican nominee for State Board of Education seat number 11, which is based up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, mostly Fort Worth and West. And he's a great person to talk to us a little bit about the State Board of Education and what's happening there and on the campaign trail. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Garrett, thanks so much for having me. It's just like old times, you and me getting together to talk about politics. So it's good to see you again.
Absolutely. Brandon and I worked together for a year or two. I'm not sure how long we overlapped on the Abbott campaign, but we were, at the hip, getting the grassroots out all across the state, working on getting people trained up and moved out. So it's great to see you again, and great to see you having such great success. You knocked out a 22-year incumbent in the primary. You're the odds-on favorite for your district. So I wanted to really pick your brain a little bit about what's going on at the State Board of Education. But, before we get into that, tell the folks who are listening a little bit about who you are, and a little bit about, your race as it stands currently.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Garrett said, we won the primary in March and seating a 22-year incumbent for State Board of Education District 11. And so I live in Parker County, which is just west of Fort Worth, and I pastor a church in Springtown. And so ministry is really my passion, and where my passion for people and young people like our students comes from. And so, my wife and I are just really love to be involved and feel like this is a great way for us to make an impact. And so we got into the State Board of Education race for that reason. And we've seen door after door just open up in front of us. So we know this is the path that God has for us, and really excited about it. Looking at November, we're in a district that's heavily Republican. And so it looks like about a 25 to 30% Republican district. And Trump would probably win our district by about 150,000, 170,000 votes.
Wow.
So we're looking really good for November.
Fantastic. Well, as somebody who's done a lot of door knocking, whenever doors open, it's always great, because then you have an opportunity to have a conversation. But especially when the Lord's opening those doors for you, it's a great opportunity to get some stuff going on. You did a lot of door knocking, I know, during the primary. I'm sure you've done some here in the general election as well, even though you are in an R+30. Kind of what is the conversation people have or what kind of conversation are you having with people at the doors? Are they enthusiastic, not enthusiastic? What's the case?
I think it's really interesting running for SBOE right now, because normally this is a seat where nobody would know who their SBOE member is. A lot of people do not know who their SBOE member is, much less the candidates running for the position. But within the past few years, especially since COVID, we've seen people get a lot more engaged with education, and of course their local school boards. And even SBOE is it's very, controversial right now. People are paying a lot of attention. And I think some of that is, some of the issues we ran on, like, some things that have been problematic in our schools, and the fact that, over half of Texas students don't read at grade level. Those things are really starting to concern parents and taxpayers alike. And so there's a lot of energy on the ground for new leadership on the State Board of Education. That's one thing we see everywhere we go. I have 6 counties in my district, and no matter what county or town that I'm in, people, are very locked in, more than you would normally see, which is really cool to be running at this time when people seem to be more engaged.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I think it does seem like education has been a bigger issue. I mean, education is always a major issue, and especially statewide races, because it's one of the biggest budget items. But it seems as if it's taken on a whole new importance since COVID. But most people, like you said, don't know who their SBOE representative is. I think most people probably don't even know that we have a State Board of Education, let alone that we vote for somebody on it. So do you know about why the legislature split it off, and kind of what is the roles and responsibilities of the board and of the members themselves?
Yeah. So like you said, it is something not a lot of people know exactly what they do or what the responsibilities are. But it is a very important position for setting education policy and setting the curriculum standards for, what the kids are actually learning. They manage the school permanent fund, which is, a huge responsibility that they have as well. And I think, kind of the biggest thing is Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, the TEKS, and that kind of determines what our kids actually are going to be learning. Like, these are the things they have to learn. The SBOE covers graduation standards. They cover teacher certification. So there's a lot of big, important responsibilities you wouldn't really think about, but they really have a huge impact over the direction of Texas education.
That's awesome. So, what you mentioned that the SBOE, I know they met last week to talk about some of the stuff that the legislature put out. There's a new bill. I'm not sure if it was the 89th or the 87th, 1605, but I know that there's a deadline coming out where there's new standards that the board is working through. And they're always talking about other things too. I think that there's a number of issues that the state board has to vote on and that you mentioned on when it comes to funding and other standards. So kind of what are you seeing is happening at the board currently? And then what are things that you will be doing from that going forward once you're inaugurated, when you win in January?
So you mentioned, some new legislation. There's a couple bills that have expanded into even new territory for the SBOE. One of them is HB 900, which a lot of people know about. That's our, library books, school libraries bill. And it gave the SBOE actually new authority where they didn't have before to actually set library standards. And that was done because we have seen a lot of problematic books in some of our school libraries, even elementary schools. And so the legislature did give the SBOE new authority to be able to tackle that and hopefully rein it in a little bit. And then schools are supposed to respond according to the standards and make sure that the books they have meet those. So that's a new, big responsibility. Of course, that's a controversial hot topic. It's one of the things that I ran on. I mean, I think I've seen a lot of really crazy examples of some things that very young children have access to. Even I mentioned I am a pastor in Parker County, and in a small town called Springtown, and it's a very conservative town. I mean, it's full. My church is one of the many churches in this small town, and it's a place where you wouldn't expect to find anything like that. And yet, going through a lot of the books that our kids have access to in our libraries, I found concerning examples even in a place like this. So you can imagine. Especially in some of our more urban schools, just a lot of concerning things there. That's one of the things I ran on. I'm excited to be able to go to the SBOE and tackle that issue and see what we can do on the state level to make sure that our kids are not exposed to anything inappropriate or indoctrinating in the libraries. The other thing, the really big one actually is HB 1605. And so 1605 really kind of changes the way that the SBOE operates. At least it gives them a lot of new authority, and it establishes something called the IMRA process, which is instructional materials review and approval. And so it's this whole new process where all of the curriculum that's being offered to Texas schools needs to go through this process. And so publishers will have to submit their products for the IMRA review process. The TEA will go through. They'll score the products in the curricula that they've submitted. And so another thing that 1605 added is a suitability rubric to make sure that these instructional materials are high quality and academically rigorous. And so they have to kind of pass through that filter and meet that bar. And then, of course, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, the TEKS that we've talked about before. There's a lot of acronyms here. Yeah. And so the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills basically says, okay, at this grade level, this is what the students have to learn for this subject. And so the TEA will score these new products based on if they meet the TEKS and what percentage of the TEKS they meet, and they'll make sure that they're state law compliant. And then from there, the TEA will bring together Texas Education Agency. I need to define all of these acronyms just in case folks haven't heard them. But the Texas Education Agency will come in and appoint committees to review boards for these new curricula. They'll go through, give their recommendations, see if they think anything needs to be changed. And then the public can actually give input. And if anybody would like to, be involved in that going forward, they can go to the TEA website and they can find, how to get involved in the IMRA process. You can actually go through, these are posted online. And so you can actually go through and look at the products that are in the IMRA process for review. And if you have changes or you have concerns, you can send those into to the TEA as well during that period.
And then also wasn't there stuff with 1605 where those materials would be available once they were approved and they're in the classroom, that the parents would have access to the materials as they're going through?
Yeah, that's correct. So it sets up a parent portal requirement. So everything that is adopted by a local ISD has to go into a parent portal where they
Okay.
can go in and view everything that their kids are learning and all of these materials. So it
Oh,
does
wow.
that as well. And then kind of at the end of that IMRA process, it'll go before the SBOE, and the SBOE will decide either to approve, to disapprove, or to take no action. And so, our ISDs are really incentivized, and they're really supposed to pick from that approved list that the SBOE puts out.
Right.
And there's even in 1605 new funding to actually incentivize that. And then
Like $40 per kid, right?
it is, yeah,
Like per
yeah,
year.
hmm
That's a lot. I mean, which
absolutely,
adds up in a hurry if you're using those. Well, and and that accounts for like digitally transmitted stuff. So effectively, it's the state paying for. In a way, it's the state paying for a lot of the cost of textbooks. If
yeah,
you do approve textbooks if the school board wants to go on its way, they have to find a way to pay for it themselves.
right, exactly. And then I don't know if you wanted to cover talk about the curriculum, because that's a kind of a huge controversial part of 1605.
I mean, explain the controversy and explain give your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I'll give the background first. I mean, an issue we've had in the past in Texas is we have the SBOE sets these standards. Like, you have the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills saying what they're supposed to be learning. Now the SBOE is setting suitability rubrics to make sure the instructional materials are high quality. And what we've ran into in the past is that a lot of the curricula that was out there didn't meet these new, didn't meet the standards and only came up to a certain percentage. And so the state saw a need for kind of the TEA to develop its own curriculum that would actually meet all of the standards, that would be state law compliant. So when school districts are considering what they're going to go with, they'll have an option that's always going to be compliant with TEKS. It's going to be guaranteed to be high quality and meet the rubric. And then it's also going to, of course, not be problematic at all with critical race theory or any of those other things in Texas law that we've had issues with some of our previous curriculums. And so 1605 provided funding for that, for the TEA to develop a new curriculum. And so they have one that they've rolled out this year. It's gone through the IMRA process, and it's all the way up to SBOE approval in November. And they're calling it Bluebonnet. Another name that's been used for it is OER, which is Open Educational Resources.
Okay.
And this curriculum is in the public domain. So if a school district would like to adopt it, they don't have to actually purchase the curriculum. The state's providing it to them. It would be free of cost to the local school district, and they would get the $40 allotment that comes with choosing a curriculum that's approved by the SBOE. And it would also, as 1605 also gives an additional $20 to use the state's OER curriculum specifically. So school districts will get $60 per student using OER, and then all they would have to, they could put that towards printing the curriculum. They don't have to buy it; they just have to print it.
Gotcha. Well, printing costs are always absurd, but a lot cheaper than paying for a textbook. I think everyone realizes that. Okay, so that's interesting. What is your major focus when you get whenever you take office? Like, what is your primary concern? I mean, obviously, you're going to be concerned with all of the things, but what's the thing that's really motivated you and that you're really passionate about pursuing going forward?
Well, I don't want to be too general, so I'll be very specific. But before I am, to be a little bit general, I think, as I mentioned before, half of Texas students don't read up to grade level like they should. I see the human side of that as a pastor. I'm not a former educator like a lot of people who run for SBOE. We have a lot of educators on the SBOE, which I think is great. But I also think an outside perspective is good. And I really see the human side of this, having worked with, students in ministry for quite a while, having been a youth pastor in the past, and seeing just how these problems actually come up for them and the concerns that parents have. And so I think, first of all, we need to give our kids the really good, high quality education that they deserve. Right. Texas is 36th in the entire nation, which would, shocks a lot of people. That we're ranked 36 in education in the entire nation. So we need to bring that up to number one. And, so it's like, specifically, how are we going to tackle that? Right. And then before I move on to that, it would just be a lot of the inappropriate materials that we've seen in schools, because it is an issue, like we mentioned, the library books. I think there's some curricula out there that are problematic. I think we've seen a lot of stuff in the schools. And so kind of, using the power that we do have on the SBOE and the voice you have on the SBOE to rein that in will be a big deal. And parents are really concerned about that. That's what would, really make it possible for someone like me to defeat a 22-year incumbent. People are really, they're looking for somebody who'll take action on those issues. But I think specifically, going in on the first year, it's social studies, TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, which is the standards for what our kids are actually learning at each grade level. For social studies is up for review for the first time in more than a decade.
Oh, wow.
Next year. And so they went through and tried to, review those TEKS 2 years ago, and they punted until 2025. So the first thing I'll deal with when I come into office are those TEK reviews. And so I'm really excited about that and the opportunity to make an impact and probably improve those TEKS. So I think there's some improvements that can be made there.
Without, you may not have it in front of you, so I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but are there any problematic TEKS in social studies that you want to remove, or are there things that you would mostly want to add to that make sure that we have more robust requirements?
So I think a lot of it is actually like rearranging things, right? Like deciding when kids learn things at what grade level. Okay. I think, as I've looked at the TEKS that we have now, I think part of the issue that we've had is you'll learn, it's like what period of history are they learning when? Are they learning American history and Texas history sort of simultaneously for context, right? Because if you learn, I've seen that it's problematic if you learn Texas history kind of all on its own, and then you're trying to figure out, okay, what else was taking place in the rest of the United States during this time? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one thing we can look at is just bringing context into them for that. I'll give you like one specific example. In sixth grade, the TEKS say that sixth grade should be a world cultures course in Texas, and they haven't even had world history up to sixth grade. And so, that's one thing that I'll really, I think we should change that. I think world culture should probably be part of 1 year, but not the entire year. That's one specific example of some of the adjustments and rearrangements that we can make, I think.
And then do y'all do anything with the standardized testing, or do y'all approve the test or anything, or is that all at the TEA?
Yeah, so we do, approve those standardized tests. And then, of course, we work with the TEA and the local ISDs on that as well.
Okay. Well, when it comes to other hot button issues, so with 900 in particular, there's a lot of stuff when it comes to how the books are playing out. Now, I've seen some commentary coming out of the meeting from last week where the TEA administrator, Morath, made some comments during testimony where he seemed to indicate that there was some looseness in the definitions of what is obscene material, or effectively, my understanding of what his argument is, if a book has been deemed by at the state level as being explicit, then it's explicit. But until that happens, the school board has discretion to make changes as they see fit. Is there anything the SBOE can do, or is this going to be a legislative fix if that's going to be the interpretation?
I think it's both. I think we have to continue to, in my mind, one of the issues with 900 is there's really no enforcement mechanism. So theoretically, the SBOE can set these standards. The TEA can go through and say, here are the inappropriate books you need to remove. And then school districts could still completely ignore that and keep them all, and there really wouldn't be a penalty. I mean, I think there's fines and things like that, but there needs to be some kind of, force behind that, some kind of an enforcement mechanism to actually provide accountability. I think and we're not talking about, this is not really a local control issue. Like, we want to give ISDs the local control that they need to educate students, right, in the way that's, as long as they're up to standards, in the way that fits their region best. And you know how big Texas is. I mean, from working on the Abbott campaign, it's just so different across the state. So we want ISDs to have as much local control as possible. What we're talking about here is taking obscene, inappropriate things out of the libraries. And that's just that should be a statewide standard, right? That has nothing to do with educating our kids. And so I think, it's both. I think we need there's probably some things we can do to tighten up with HB 900. Some rumors I've already heard about some legislators that might want to do that with the enforcement mechanism. The other issue would be with, you heard Marath, you mentioned Marath's comments, and I think he said that in that comment that he made, I think he also said that one of the standards, according to the law, is they have to provide for them to remove them. If they're obscene or whatever, they also have to have no educational value whatsoever, know? And so it's basically, I think that language could be changed as well to where even if you could conceive of an educational value that this inappropriate book might have, maybe it's not appropriate for this grade level.
I mean, that's a difficult thing to parse out with legislatively, but it is something that they need to investigate how to do. I mean, because that's one of those things where it's like, does a medical textbook, is it anatomically correct and to what level? Like when it comes to certain parts being just shown or whatnot, but also with, there are going to be books that have themes and whatever that are inappropriate. I know there are exceptions for books that are specifically approved, which is how things like the Bible or Shakespeare are able to remain in libraries because they're included on various different TEKS or whatever else for like world studies or world religion or English literature or whatever. So there are going to be books where people are like, this is a classic part of canon or history or whatever. That stuff's going to be included, but I struggle with this issue because I'm a big free speech proponent. I've had the author of HB 900 on the podcast twice, once explicitly to talk about this, Jared Patterson. I had lawyers from FIRE who are suing the state over different aspects of 900's implementation, but not the school part. And maybe it wasn't 900, maybe it was a different bill. Well, it was 14, but it's just a similar bill. But I've had different people from different sides of this issue, and I kind of come down to the side of I think more speech is better. But when it comes to kids, you do want to protect from certain things. It's just very, very difficult with how the Supreme Court has said, of the United States has said, how you can limit speech to navigate that, even with the carve-outs they say where you can protect children far more than you can protect adults. It's a difficult challenge for legislators, for the SBOE, and for anyone who's trying to talk about this issue with that framework in place. No real question there. It's more of a comment from my standpoint. Do you have any major initiatives besides? I mean, TEKS is the one we talked about. But do you have any other major initiatives that you ran on that you've been talking about a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's going back to the library standards. It's tightening up those and making sure we actually follow through and get those books out of the schools. And so that's one of the biggest ones. Working through the TEKS, OER for me, the curriculum has really become an initiative that I have because I think that it solves a lot of problems we've had in Texas for literally decades. And I think it raises the standards for academic rigor to a great level of where we really need to be in Texas. And so we'll have to go through and approve that new curriculum by grade level and subject. And so that's going to take a few years. And that's, one of my big initiatives it's been somewhat controversial. One of my big initiatives is going to be seeing that passed and kind of walking with that through.
When it comes to OER, that's the one you said that was being developed by TEA.
Yeah.
Assuming that ends up being implemented in a large scale, it's going to take a while for those to be fully built out. What's kind of the schedule with updates to it? Because you don't want textbooks that are 30 years old, even if it's a digital one. I imagine it's like the TEKS. Will you go? Is there going to be a set schedule to go back and revisit English every 10 years or social studies or whatever?
Yeah, there is a set schedule where you go back through and review. And, so once they're approved, I think it'll be ready the next school year. So if the SBOE were to approve what's on the table right now is reading language arts K through 5 and then math K through 5 for the TEA OER curriculum. And so if they approve that that'll be available as soon as next year. And there is a set schedule where they go back through and review, make sure that they provide updates as necessary.
One thing that's notable about the importance of SBOE is it's a nationally important office because of how big Texas is as a purchaser of textbooks, that the standards set by the SBOE in Texas can really drive national standards, because there will be states that just don't have the buying power to demand textbook makers change their stuff. So you end up having a lot of people who end up just buying the Texas textbooks for a lot of things, and it can really drive policy. I wonder how this will impact that. I mean, it'll be in the public domain, but they may not, since Texas isn't the driver anymore. I wonder if that'll lessen Texas impact long term. But who cares if it's helping our kids?
Yeah, well, I think OER is something that other states could probably look at too. I mean, I've spent a lot of time this summer going through the actual curriculum and reading through textbooks and looking at the quality and the standards and the content. And I think it's something that other states could probably look through as well. Like you mentioned, Texas is 10% of all of the students in the United States, which is huge.
It's a lot. You say you've been going through the curriculum, so I have to ask you an embarrassing question. Do you think you'd perform better on the SAT today than you did in high school?
Hopefully so. Yeah, I would think so.
I don't know. See, I ask myself that question sometimes, and then I think about what politics has done to my brain over the past 20 years, and I'm not.
That's true.
That's true. Not so sure. Okay, Brandon. Well, is there anything else you'd want to kind of highlight before we end it for the week?
Yeah, I think I would just mention again, going back to the new curriculum. There's been a lot of controversy. There's been a lot of people that think that the fact that it puts Bible stories back in the curriculum is problematic, and so that's a battle that played out at the SBOE this week, and a lot of debate there, a lot of public comment, and then they'll make that decision in November. But as I've been able to look through the curriculum, I'm very passionate about it. I've become very passionate about it because I think it's the right move. For the SBOE, it's the right move for the state of Texas. And I do think it'll solve a lot of problems that we've had for decades. I think even when you look at some of the Bible stories that have been mentioned in the curriculum, it's not, a lot of people have argued, well, we shouldn't teach theology or Christianity in the classroom. And it really doesn't do that. But for a long time in Texas, a lot of our curriculum, a lot of our different curricula has arbitrarily removed references to the Bible and its impact on our history, laws, and culture.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to tell the story of America without telling the story of the Bible. I mean, and if you look at the English canon, even at like a college or graduate level, you have to dig into a certain level of knowledge of the Bible, its stories, and how it's impacted because of how those different works have interplayed with one another. The Bible is still, to me and many folks, the most important literature or documentary book in existence beyond its religious ramifications. But it was, by all standards, the most important forever. And if you're looking at how Shakespeare or anything written before probably 1950 in the United States or England was written, it's going to be with the knowledge and like the assumption that people know stories from the Bible, and that knowledge informs the stories and what you know about different things moving forward. So if you're going to have to talk about the Bible if you're talking about anything that's old. History, whatever else. You can't talk about the history of the Puritans coming to America without talking about the history of religious persecution and talking to a certain degree about what they believed versus what England believed versus all the different stuff going on. And yeah, there are ways to do it where it's viewpoint neutral, where it's not advocating for a specific religion, but you have to be able to talk about it. And we have to teach kids how to talk about politics and religion without being so upset. So I think it's really important that we start looking at ways to add certain levels of biblical stories, but just the ones that, especially the stories in the Bible, because that's literature at its very core. Yeah. And it shouldn't be precluded just because it's from a religious text. So I think that's really important. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. Is there any way people can find information about you, learn more, or help your campaign at all?
Yeah, they can go to Brandon Hall for TEKS. So that's FORTX.com, and they can find out more about me, donate to the campaign, and I'm excited.
Fantastic, Brandon. Well, thank you so much. And for those watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, leave a comment. If you're listening on your podcast platform, do the same. Make sure you subscribe and drop us an email at hosts@seeingredpodcast.com or follow us on social media. Pretty much every handle is going to be at the Seeing Red Pod. And shoot us a message one way or the other if you want to hear about a topic or if you have an idea for a guest or if you'd like to be a guest. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
You've been listening to the See in Red podcast. It's always Texas politics and beyond. We present the facts and opinions. The See in Red podcast with your host, Andy Turner and Garrett Fulce. Thank you, and tune in next week. And please do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode.